I'm a filmmaker, director, and I say I am rather than I want to be, because that's who I am since I was a kid.
Good. And that works really well for anyone, unless when you say it, it feels a little worse. Because if you don't believe that, then saying that introduces resistance. But when you do believe it, then saying it increases allowance.
Right.
Yeah.
In my gut, I really feel that I am the greatest storyteller of all times. And I just feel that not in a narcissistic way, but in a sense that there are really amazing stories that just in me that are slowly showing me how to express them.
The reason that it came out of you in the way that it did, the greatest of all time, is because you're tapping into this broader perspective. And when you do, it feels like superconsciousness, because it is.
Yeah. I had a few moments where I've really felt it is coming from some other place.
It's not coming from another place, so to speak. It's coming from the intentionality that you've launched into your vibrational reality, a vibrational reality where your inner being and source energy reside and focus and call cooperative components to, and you are one of the cooperative components that's being called to it. And it is logical that the storyline would occur to you.
Yes.
We want to just stick in a little piece of encouragement, not that you need it, but it can smooth some bumps out for you a little bit. Let it unfold naturally and do nothing from your human perspective to try to push it or nudge it along. In other words, if you can trust that the stories are there and that now your work is to be in the receiving mode, it'll go really well for you. And one more little piece. The story is continuing to evolve. We want to give you an example. Now, this is going to sound really rudimentary to you because you are far more advanced in your process than Esther was at the time that this occurred. But we want to tell you this story. So, the Sarah books, do you know about them? The Sarah books were in the vortex. Esther didn't know about them. In other words, Esther grew up in a little town, and she did meet an owl on a trail, and Thacker's Trail was a real place for her. But she didn't know about the storyline for the Sarah series. And so one day, Jerry and Esther were in San Diego, and they had a gathering like this, very small, and a man was there who Esther had never met. And he walked up to them, and he had a book in his hands, and Esther said, "Oh, is that book for me?" Well, it wasn't for her. He just had it in his hands. But Esther wanted it. And he said, "Well, I don't really want you to have it." And Esther said, "Can I just have it overnight?" And he said, "I guess, crazy lady," was what he was thinking. So that happened. So Esther took the book to her room and never even thought about it again. She didn't open the book. So the next day, Jerry and Esther were walking around a little lake at the hotel where they were staying. And there was a gate and a hidden trail, and they hiked up to a place that they probably shouldn't have been and peeked over a fence. And in the middle of the pond was a statue of an owl. And then Jerry said, "By the way, I returned that book to that man that you took it from." And Esther said, "Oh, thank you. I forgot all about that." And Jerry said, "I scanned the book." And Esther said, "What was it about?" And Jerry said, "It was about talking animals." Esther said, "Oh." So then the next day, they ran into that same person nowhere near the hotel, and he had a friend with them who he introduced to them. And the friend's name was Solomon. So now, see this sequence of events that had happened in Esther's real-life attraction. There's an owl, and there's a book about talking animals, and there's a man named Solomon. And now as Esther starts receiving the book, all of these pieces begin showing up as part of the storyline. You see what we're getting at?
Yeah.
And so that's what happens. In other words, you're receiving blocks of thought that the life experience that you're living gives you a basis from which to translate them into.
Right.
So it's a blending of what you know, and that's why it's always evolving and surprising and delighting you. It's not like a storyline that you've carried around forever and ever. It's a storyline that is basically there, that you were even born with, that you were born to convey, that now in the path of least resistance. So what happened there? Well, Esther was inspired to go to a corner of a room and meet a man and snatch a book right out of his hand. A book that she never looked at, but it was part of the unfolding for her. You see what we're getting at?
Yes.
And then they were inspired to climb up this hill and look over this fence and see something that in and of itself didn't mean anything to her, but it was part of something else. We know you're understanding this in a very real way.
Yes. And when I was coming here, I wasn't seeking for this is great, but I wasn't seeking for a prescription in a sense, but I was more, I guess it has to be least resistance.
It has to come piece by piece, and being sensitive as you are to how you feel, you'll recognize the pieces that fit.
Yes.
In fact, it reaches the place that only the pieces that fit are noticed by you.
Yes, and I'm experiencing, of course I don't want to say problems, but they're challenges, and then I get inspired to go around them.
Because the challenge causes you to focus.
Right.
The challenge causes you to feel.
Right.
Every challenge or problem, there's another end of the stick that you can't see while you're focused upon the problem, but as you relax and breathe the problem away, you're left with the other end of the stick. And sometimes, we don't want to hurt any of your feelings, but sometimes it's easier to lead you to the problem end of the stick than it is to the solution end of the stick, because you hang around there more often. And so lots of times the problem will be activated first, which will cause you to focus yourself into the solution. Esther said for years to Jerry, I shine in a crisis. So one day, Jerry was talking with Abraham. He said, Abraham, why is it that Esther shines in a crisis? And we said, because a crisis causes her to focus. And when you focus, answers come, yes?
Yes. To go specifically, I was trained to be a filmmaker. I went to film school and all that.
You know the mechanics of it and you know the process of it, but don't let them train the inspiration out of you.
That's exactly what they did. So it's for a couple of years it was not happening because I was just focused on how they taught me the mechanics.
That part of it matters too, though, because without the mechanics, in the early days when Esther was receiving us, she was receiving the thoughts and typing them, not speaking them, typing them. And so one day, it was before computers. She was using an IBM Selectric typewriter. And so she said, the word processors are coming out, Abraham, do you think I should get one? And we said, stick with this. Learn the mechanics. Esther already was typing 120 words a minute. But now she's typing 120 words a minute and receiving us at the same time.
Wow.
We said, settle in there for a little while. Settle in there. And once you're settled there, then you can move to another contraption. And so get familiar with your devices is what we were saying to her, which is exactly what you were. Get familiar with the process. Get familiar with the industry. Get familiar with the mechanics of it, because you can't do something that's a totally different structure than the world is ready or willing to receive. You want to know that. You can adapt into that. Your inspiration will merge with that. You're not starting everything all over again.
No, I don't think so.
Yes.
Yes. It's definitely revealing itself to me.
We want to do one quick clarification.
Sure.
The revealing is happening constantly. The realization is what you're talking about. The revelation is steadily right there for you when you relax and allow yourself to realize it. And there's a difference between the realization and the revelation, because the revealing is happening. We really want you to feel that. It's already created. The revealing is already happening. It's the realization that you want to fun your way into, relax your way into, chill your way into.
I've been following Abraham for 2 years, and before the teachings, it was, I have a story, I gotta get it done, and this is the time limit, and and send it to the producer, and he's gonna say yay or nay, and then end of it, and then maybe write another one. Maybe another producer will like that.
And now what it's like is, the world is ready for a story. And they've put what they're wanting in the story in the vortex. And your inner being is aware of what the story is being asked for, what the popular story that's being asked for is. And you're being inspired to the timing of the time to pull the trigger. Creation is about timing. And storytelling is about lining up with those that want to hear the story. And your inner being knows the readiness of the culture and the universe for the story. In other words, it really isn't, I have a story to tell and I'm going to tell it to you ready or not. Because it's attraction, attraction, attraction. The world is attracting the story through you.
Oh, wow.
Can you feel that?
Yes.
And doesn't that take the pressure off you? They know what story they want. I'm willing.
Yes. So now the little bit of wobble is, I have 10 stories. They're all incomplete. And it's just, they're all beautiful in their ways, but I get extreme impulse to write them. And I don't write them until I'm fully inspired to write them and to pull the trigger. But even when I do, they just stop at a certain point.
Or pause. This is why what we were talking about earlier is it's never complete, it's another idea and another idea. But you see, that training that you received before that has you worried that something's wrong here, when really it's just a comfortable unfolding. Some of those stories will begin to merge together, but the stories are writing themselves. The stories are writing themselves.
Wow, I never...
Esther, that night, we'll tell you one more piece of this, and then we'll take a segment of refreshment because we know we're over time here. So Esther was in a hotel room, and it was the day that she had her first little Mac computer. And Jerry had gone to sleep, and Esther was watching television. And there was an interviewer named Charlie Rose who was interviewing Winfred Marsalis, and Jerry and Esther had just seen him in Martha's Vineyard, and so Esther watched the program because she wanted to hear what he had to say. She found him to be really delightful, and she thinks part of her Abraham family. In other words, everything he said just resonated with what she knows to be. Then the next person being interviewed was Thomas Wolfe. Esther didn't know who he was, but he's a writer. He was writing famous things that Esther was not aware of, and he was writing at that time the Twin Peaks series on television that Esther had never watched or never heard of either, but she listened to the interview. And so the interviewer said to him, "How do you find the words for your characters?" And this filmmaker said, "I don't." And Charlie Rose said, "Well, where do the words come from?" And he says, "I define the characters and I put them in a time and place together, and they write their own conversation with each other." And when Esther heard that, she was just covered with goosebumps. And she said, "Abraham, what do you think about that?" And we said, "Get out your computer and see." So Esther opened up her computer, put herself into receiving mode, and the words came. First words of the book. Sarah lay in her bed, disappointed to find herself awake. And Esther thought, holy crap, here we go. In other words, she began receiving this dialogue because it was always ready. She just had to be ready to realize it, you see. We'll have more fun with you before these days are over.
Awesome.
This is a really good basis of understanding. And this is an audience full of creative people, so this will be fun. This is a very good time for a segment of refreshment.